Watts 957 RP. Good?
I think so.
Go ahead, go on. All right, we're going to do this 957 RP. This RP was primarily developed for fire sprinkler system, but it has evolved into just a good general purpose all around backflow preventer. The nice thing about it is it's made out of Schedule 40 stainless steel instead of typical ductile iron that we're used to working with, so it's much lighter. I mean, that's a 4-inch assembly, and I can pick it up by myself. Now, granted, it's got 2.5-inch ball valves on it, but it's the exact same assembly from coupling to coupling, 2.5 through 4 inch. So you only have one repair kit for 2.5, 3, and 4, which is kind of nice. Which is, most of us know for watts, that's a feat, you know. So, but anyway, this thing is probably one of the easiest large diameter backflow assemblies that there is on the market to work on. All we're going to do, obviously, we're going to take this thing apart, we're going to rebuild it, and we're going to put it back together. Now, to access your check valves on the 957, you'll need to remove the number 3 test cock. Now, you should be able to remove this thing by hand, okay, because actually the manufacturer instructions tell you to never put a wrench on this test cock, okay, because it is rubber sealed, it's got a rubber O-ring on it, so it doesn't have to be that tight. Now, keep up with this thing, don't lose it, do not damage these threads, okay, these are a proprietary thread, and the only thing that will screw into this collar on this backflow preventer is this test cock. Okay, so we want to make sure we take care of that. You can just take that and lay it in place safe. Now, to gain access to the check valves on this thing, you slide the collar all the way back until it rests against this other metallic coupling over here. Now, before you do that, you want to make sure and clean this barrel, okay, because you've got 2 rubber O-rings, one at either end of this collar, and if you have grit and trash and debris build up on this barrel of this thing, when you slide it, you roll all that grit and trash and debris underneath those check valves, underneath those O-rings, and it can cause some leakage between the barrel and the collar. So make sure you get that nice and clean. Now, to slide this thing back, you can either take a number 3 Phillips screwdriver and stick it in the hole on this tang on the collar and break it loose and rotate it and slide it back this way. Or you can just grab it by the relief valve. It seems to be a little bit easier. You just kind of work it back and forth until you get all the way back. Now, once you get it against the metallic coupling, you'll need to turn it 90 degrees, okay, and that's so you can clear this tang so you can get the check valves out. Okay? So you can sit. So turn that 90 degrees to get that out of the way. Once you get the collar back out of the way, now you have access to your check retainer and your 2 check valves. The check retainer just simply sits down in between those 2 checks. So remove that. Okay, now we're ready to remove our check valves. Now the check valves on the 957, there's no particular way that these have to come out. You can take the number 1 out, then the number 2, or the number 2, and then the number 1. So there's no particular way you have to do this. They're relatively easy to get out. Each one of these checks have little slots in them where you can insert a screwdriver blade, a flat blade screwdriver, and just kind of twist it and give it a little pry. And then your check valve will come out of the unit. Same thing on the number 1 check valve. Just twist it, give it a little pry, and it will come out. Now, just something else I failed to mention, before you take these check valves out, always make sure your number 3 and number 4 test cocks are open. If not, you'll trap an air pocket back there and you'll create a vacuum. You pull the check out and it'll just suck right back in there. So make sure you open your test cocks. Now you remove your check valves. Now another nice thing about this thing is that you cannot put these check valves in backwards. Okay, they'll only go in one way. So if you'll notice, the number 2 check valve has got these notches in the back of it right here. Okay, they were made up to these notches in the barrel right here. But the number 1 check valve does not have those. So if you try to put the number 1 check in the number 2 hole, it won't go all the way in. So it's pretty much idiot proof. It's Richard proof, as I like to say. And obviously we know that's the number 1 because it has much heavier spring on the check valve. Okay. Now these things are a wound steel, a wound spring steel loading on them with a lever type system. Okay, now to get access to the disc, I have to relieve the spring tension off of these levers so I can get to my screws to remove my disc. Now, the best thing to use that I found to do that with is a number 3 Phillips screwdriver. Now, you can do this with a number 2 Phillips, but it's not really big enough. Okay, it'll work, but not very well. What happens if you use a number 2 Phillips screwdriver for this, because once you get this released, this entire spring assembly will slide out of this check. So if you have a number 2 Phillips in there and you slide it out and you happen to drop it or bump it, it'll come apart and the spring will unwind on you. And then you're about 2 hours on a bench vise trying to get it screwed, wound back together and to get it back together appropriately. Ask me how I know, okay? But a number 3 Phillips screwdriver is perfect. You got a notch in either side of this check valve, and then you got a hole through this lever system. Take the screwdriver and stick it into the hole and work it in to those grooves. Once you get that in there like that, now that relieves just enough of that spring tension that the clapper on that check is loose. And now once you do that, you've got a pin right here that's got an E-clip on it. Okay, that holds this pin in it, holds the levers to the spring assembly. You must remove that E-clip. Now, in my simple mind, the appropriate way to remove that E-clip will be to turn it facing up, like this, and then take my dental pick and reach in there and get underneath that E-clip and then just pop the thing out, right?
Yeah.
You're exactly right. Where does it go when I do that? It goes straight down the floor drain, because it's just like all these little parts on these backflow preventers that come from the manufacturer with built-in floor drain magnets in them, which just if it gets out of my hand, it's going straight down the floor drain. And the bad thing about that is they're all stainless steel, so the magnet won't do any good. So what we found a much better way to do that is if you'll point that E-clip pointing down, and take your dental clip or dental pick and reach in there, and then pop it down like that. See, now it goes down inside the check valve, so when I open up the check valve, I can recover the E-clip. Okay, because that E-clip does not come in the repair kit. So if you're doing a repair and you lose that E-clip, you're pretty much toast. Okay, so make sure you don't lose that. Once you get the E-clip removed, now you can remove the pin, which will release the levers. And incidentally, there's 2 different styles of this check. There's this style that has the 2 heavy gauge levers on it. There's also another version of this that actually has 3 levers. It has 2 on one side and 1 on the other, and they're much thinner. And then there will also be a little nylon bushing that will go on that pin that takes up that extra space. That is one of the designs of the check valve, so they don't all look exactly like this one. But once I get my E-clip off, now I can remove the pin. And again, obviously we don't want to lose our pin. Now I can open up my check valve and I can recover my E-clip, so I haven't lost it. I did that yesterday. I popped it down, and when I popped it down, it would hit the bottom and bounce out. So it's like, yeah, there you go. That's nice. Now, see, once I remove that, now that check valve, that check just flaps open. Now I get access to the desk area. So, but at this point, instead of trying to hold all this stuff like this, since I have my number 3 Phillips instead of my number 2 in here, see, I can go ahead and remove that spring assembly. And as long as it's captured like that, it's safe. Okay, it's not going to come unwound. That's what I was saying about the number 2. It's not really quite big enough. So if you got it like that, you bump it, you got a problem. So I'm just going to lay that down over here so it's safe and move it out of the way. Now, to access my disc, all I need to do is remove these 5 screws right here. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and remove my disc from the check valve. Take the number 2 Phillips screwdriver. And remove the screws. And this part takes a while. Now these screws, they're a very coarse threaded screw, is what they are, and they actually screw into plastic threads. Okay, so when you're putting these things back together, make sure that you have them started appropriately before you start wrenching on it with your screwdriver. Okay, because if you damage those threads, strip out the threads on the screw, now essentially you destroy the check valve. So you want to pay particular attention when you're putting them back together. So we get our screws removed. Now we can remove our check retainer. It also takes our lever system apart. Now these levers just have a pin through the bottom of them that rests in a groove down there. Okay, so you want to inspect that area, make sure the pin's properly situated and that everything is functioning properly on that end of them. And it looks like it is. Okay, so now we've got my screws apart. Now I can remove my disc. I can clean or inspect my rubber, make sure that it's in good shape, it'll hold water, there's no damage to it, no cuts, nicks, debris embedded in it, everything is in good shape. Now at this time I want to go ahead and inspect my check cartridge. Okay, I want to check my disc holder, make sure there's no damage to the edges of it, make sure it's not broken, make sure everything's clean in the back side so I get a good seat on my rubber disc. I want to inspect my seat sealing surface, obviously, to make sure that it's free, clear, doesn't have any debris or chips or gouges or anything in the seat, that it's in good shape and will seal. Something else that you want to inspect on these as well, look at these two little levers on the bottom. This is actually your guide system for this check. You make sure that it opens straight back and forth. These little levers are held on with a Phillips screw on either side of them. Just make sure the screws are there and make sure that they're tight. Also, these levers have got elongated holes in them. Make sure that the back side of that hole is not full of trash and debris, because when that disc is in there, the reason those are elongated, that disc is in there so it's a little bit thicker. So what happens when that closes, it actually pushes that out like that. So it closes flat. If that's full of debris, it won't close. It'll do something like this because that disc will hit on the bottom first. So that's why those holes are elongated, so it'll close nice and flat. So make sure that your guide system is in good shape. There's no damage, no cracks, no breaking. Make sure the little holes are clear. Make sure the screws are tight. Again, inspect your seat O-ring. Make sure that it's fresh, that it's got some liveliness left to it, some elasticity, that it's not square and dried out. And make sure the black is not coming off on your finger when you're cleaning and rubbing on it and rinsing it off. Everything appears to be in good shape. And we just simply reinstall the check in a reverse order. First thing we'll do is put our disc back in our disc holder. And then we'll put our disc retainer, make sure our levers are in the appropriate grooves like they're supposed to be. Put my disc holder back on there. Now I always like to make sure that I can start these screws by hand. Get them at least a half a round or a round down in there by hand, so that way I know I'm not cross-threading those screws. And if I cross-thread these screws, like I said, I will destroy the check valve, and I want to complete another check just because I stripped out a screw. And no, four screws, it won't seal, it'll leak. So you have to have all 5 screws in. Okay, so we get all of our screws back in there. Tighten them back up appropriately. Again, just like with everything else, I always like to tighten my screws or my bolts that are crisscross pattern. That way I know to get everything pulled down nice and straight and flat. Disc and disc holder reassembled. Close your disc. When you close your disc, make sure that you pull your levers back to the side, to the top side of the check valve, because if they're down here and you put your spring assembly in, you have to take it back out again. So make sure your springs are to the top side, and then reinsert your spring assembly. Your spring, your pin hole will go towards the top side of the check valve. Put it back in there. It just slides back down in the grooves like that. Once you achieve this, now you put your pin back in. If you haven't lost it, knock it off the table. Let it go down the floor drain. Put your pin back on there. Put your E-clip back on it. Okay. Now everything is as it should be. So now I can pull my screwdriver out, reapply the spring pressure, and now I've rebuilt my check valve. You see what I was saying about those levers? See how there's a gap on the bottom of that now? Because that disc is a little bit thicker, so it's pushed that out to make sure that that closes flat. Okay, so now I've completely rebuilt my check. Okay. Now the process for the number 1 check is exactly the same as it is for the number 2 check. It's a little more of a pain in the ass to get the screwdriver into it because it's a heavier spring, obviously. But other than that, it's the exact same process. Now, on this unit, I'm going to go ahead and rebuild my relief valve as well. But before you do that, I strongly encourage you to put your check valves, your check retainer back into the assembly first. Okay, because I'm going to be monkeying with this collar. And like I said earlier, there's an O-ring in either side of this collar. If I let this collar slide forward far enough without a check in here, that O-ring drops off that edge right there, I'm pretty much toast. Okay, because when I try to get it back up on there, it's going to catch on that edge and it's going to cut that O-ring. Now, if you cut this O-ring, they are replaceable. Okay, they don't come in a normal, they'll come in a total rubber kit, but they won't come in just a regular rebuild kit. But to replace these O-rings, I have to take this barrel out of the line, out of the piping system. I have to remove the coupling, the metallic couplings, take the barrel out, slide it off, replace the O-rings, lift them back up, and then put the barrel back on, and then put the barrel back into the piping system. So, do not encourage you to mess with this thing without the check valves in it. So I'm going to go ahead and reassemble my check valves. This check valve's got a smooth backside on it, so a heavier spring in it, so I know it goes in the number 1 hole. Now, you can't put these in upside down either because they've got 2 notches on them here that ride on these rails in this barrel. So I just drop that down, pop it back in until it fully seats tight against the stainless. You know, incidentally, don't grab that collar to brace yourself to push that off. Ask me how I know that. And then we'll reinstall our number 2 check. We know this is correct because it's got the notches in it, correspond with the notches on the barrel. Drop that down in there. Push it back till it seats against the stainless. It's fully seated. Now, even this retainer, you can't put the retainer in backwards even. Okay, because the incoming side has got a large notch and a small notch, which corresponds with the notches in the check valve, and then the back one's got one large one that corresponds with the number 2 check. So you can't even put the retainer in wrong. When your checks are properly seated, the retainer should drop down in there just like that. And now it's safe to move the barrel and wiggle it around and do what I need to do. Now, when you remove your relief valve, the first thing you need to do is remove your sensing tube, right? Do not remove your sensing tube from the relief valve, okay? Because that bolt that screws onto is not a captured bolt. It's just simply a bolt with an O-ring on it. You start twisting on this, you're going to just twist the whole bolt. You're not going to get anything apart. So you'll need to remove your sensing tube from the body of the unit. So we'll go ahead and remove it here. Okay, now, at this point, another nice thing about this unit is I can actually rotate this barrel 90 degrees like this, and I get that relief valve up here where I can actually work on it. Now the next thing that we're going to do is first to get into the relief valve, we have to take this bottom cover off. Okay, now you can go ahead and unscrew it from the body and then take it off. But just a helpful household hint, if I take those screws out of there now, it's much easier while this is held stable, right? Instead of trying to hold it and fight it and fart with it. So I'm just going to leave it attached to the assembly, and I'm going to go ahead and remove the bottom of my, that thing, the relief valve, while it's stable, so that way I don't have to fight it so hard. Now, there's no spring loading on the bottom of this, on this bottom cover, so you shouldn't have to worry about any spring loading to fight on it. You take the 4 Allen head screws out. now I can remove the bottom of it, so it's easier to remove the thing. Now at this point, if I want to go ahead and remove my sensing tube, I can, and I do encourage you to do this because there's an O-ring in here that we do need to inspect and make sure that it's in good shape and or replace it. Okay, so to remove that sensing tube, you got a nut back here, you'll need to put your wrench out to back that up. Now you can take your other wrench or your pliers and you can remove that sensing tube. Once you get the sensing tube removed, as you'll see, this bolt just sticks in there. It's got a rubber O-ring on it right here. So that's why you can't just start, you can't unscrew the sensing tube from the bottom of the relief valve without taking it apart because it'll just spin on you. So we got this apart, make sure we inspect that O-ring and or change it. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and remove my relief valve from the body of the unit. Now, I should be able to do this by hand. Okay, if you have to put a wrench on this, somebody put it on too tight. There should be hand tightened only. In fact, you never want to put a wrench on this relief valve if you don't have to. Okay, because the barrel of this thing is Schedule 40 stainless, so it is somewhat flexible. Okay, if you distort the body of this relief valve, you have destroyed the relief valve. Okay, because this barrel of this thing is actually part of the guide system for the relief valve disc. So it has to be round and true so the relief valve doesn't hang up. If you have to put a wrench on it, put your pipe wrench down here on this hard, thick bottom plate down here. Okay? Never put your wrench anywhere in this area here. If you have to put your pipe wrench on it, put it on down here where you have this good, thick, solid piece of stainless down here to screw to. But you should not need a wrench to get it off, okay? Because it is rubber O-ring sealed to the body of the unit. And again, this is a proprietary thread. The only thing we'll screw on here is this relief valve. Now, once I get it apart, once I get the cover, the bottom off of it, we'll go ahead and remove my diaphragm. Okay, now the diaphragm is a convoluted diaphragm. In other words, it's folded. So when this comes out of the package, it's going to look like this. Okay, so you'll need to preform the diaphragm. But if you're going to reuse it, again, you want to pay particular attention to right where it's folded at, because that is where your wear point is going to be. It just rolls that back and forth, and this is where they tend to wear out and get holes in it right in that folded area. Now, to preform this thing, one side of this diaphragm has got a tit on it, and the other side doesn't. Okay, the tit on the diaphragm goes inside the cup. When you fold this thing over, you'll fold it over, fold it inside of itself about 50%. That's what it should look like when it's appropriately convoluted. It's folded. Okay, so I've got my diaphragm, I've inspected it, it looks pretty good. Now I need to pull my disc out so I can look at my disc, my spring, my guide system, and my seat sealing surface. Now, when you look at this relief valve, you've got this spider web looking cage thingy up here. It looks like you should be able to take it out. You can get it out, but it is not designed to be removed. This is supposed to be a permanent part of the assembly. Now it is loose and it does rotate in there. Again, that's just for alignment issues, so that everything has a little bit of play so it doesn't bind up. The relief valve actually comes out from the bottom of the unit. Okay, and what you see you've got an E-clip here. To remove that relief valve disc, you'll compress the disc so you get access to the E-clip. Now again, this, be careful with what you're doing so you don't lose your E-clip. So you can remove that. Once you get that removed, see, that will release that relief valve disc. Now you can remove it from the body of the relief valve. Now, turn our attention to our spring. The spring looks good. There's nothing wrong with that. We look at our disc. Okay, now these discs are not replaceable. It's molded rubber into this housing. So if you replace the disc on a 957 relief valve, this is what you'll replace. This is your entire component that you will replace, just to replace the disc. Now, if the disc is in good shape and you're comfortable with it, you're going to reuse that, make sure you clean it up good. Okay, paying particular attention to this area right here, right around the outside of that disc holder. Okay, because that's also part of the guide system. Okay. That slides inside the barrel. So when that slides inside you got that inside that barrel, as you can see the tolerances are really tight there. There's not a lot of wiggle. There's probably only a couple thousandths of tolerance there. And so if you have buildup or scaling this area of the relief valve disc or inside the barrel of this relief valve, okay, it is going to compromise the operation of the relief valve, and it will make it stiff and sticky, and it won't open and close properly. So make sure that you clean this up. Scotch-Brite pads work real well for cleaning these things. They're soft enough that they won't scratch the metal, but they're coarse enough that they'll get most of the debris and the scaling and the buildup off of it. So make sure that's good, nice and clean. Now your seat sealing surface on this thing is inside here. It's actually at this point right here. So this is where you'll need to make sure that you inspect your seat sealing surface to make sure that it's in good shape, doesn't have debris on it, typical things. So everything looks good. Now again, the spider web thing, it looks like you should be able to take it out. Don't take it out. Okay? Because once you take that thing out, it gets distorted, it gets bent a little bit, and the relief valve will never really line up properly again. It'll bind or tweak or just be a little bit off. Okay, so don't remove that spider web thing. Okay? Again, make sure the barrel, this side of the barrel is nice and clean. Everything works as it should. Take your new disc, slide it in there, the guide board, the spider web, and make sure that everything moves nice and freely. You've got plenty of clearance in there. You're not going to have any binding issues. Everything looks good. And that's all there is to this relief valve. Okay, and then the reassemble, we just reassemble in a reverse order. Okay, put your spring back in, and in the spider web, it's got 4 little tangs that stick down inside of it here. Your spring actually goes over those, and that's what centers the spring inside the relief valve. Okay, put your spring in, take your relief valve disc, the spring will actually go inside of the disc. Make sure you get your spring centered over your 3 tabs there, so everything is centered. Push the relief valve up, getting it back to the guide board, and then you will have to hold pressure on it. When you reinstall, just got away from me. When you reinstall your E-clip. Okay. Once that's reinstalled on there, that will secure that relief valve disc. And make sure you have a nice, smooth operation on it. Everything looks good. It's not binding, hanging up. Everything looks good. So we're going to carry on. At this point, I will need to refold my diaphragm, again with the tip being on the inside of the cup. And then that will slide down around that relief valve disc like that, with that little tip going in that hole in the back of the relief valve disc. Now, I want to make sure that I get the bead on that diaphragm down in that groove in that relief valve housing, because if I don't get it in the groove, it'll cut it and it will cause damage to it and will destroy the diaphragm. So I've got that all back down inside there. Now, before I put my bottom cover back on, I need to make sure that my sensing tube is clear. Now this bolt is hollow, and it's got 2 little bleeder holes, one on either side of it. Make sure that those are free and clear, because that's where the water comes from that puts pressure on the back of the diaphragm. Make sure that that's nice and clear. Make sure your sensing tube is good and clear. You can blow through it both directions, so life is good. So now I take my cover. I've replaced my O-ring on the bolt. Did pretty good. I made it this far for us very common. You just press that back in there like that. So now it's good to go. I should have a good watertight seal there. Now these are different sizes. A half by, it's like a half by 7/8 fitting. Smaller one goes on the diaphragm bottom. So I'm going to go ahead and reinstall my sensing tube at this point. Back it up. Give it a nice little snug turn there. Make sure everything's nice and tight. Now I'm ready to put it back in the relief valve. Now again, just like taking it off, you can go ahead and install your relief valve on the assembly and then put the cover on it, or you can put it on it without it being on there. I'll do it without it. We do it both ways. Wrench. Come back down. A lot of reflexes failed me. Okay, let that put back together, and I'm ready to reinstall my relief valve. Now we want to make sure that you lube this O-ring good on here, because we're just going to do this hand tie. So your O-ring is in good shape, clean, it's got a little lube on it. And I just thread it back, thread my relief valve back to the bottom of the assembly. Just hand tie it, that's all I need to do. Now to reinstall my sensing tube, I'll go ahead and turn my relief valve to 180 degrees, turn it back down. Now you want to kind of make sure that this part of the sensing tube is clear as well. Okay, because typically where does your sensing tube plug up? Right here where it's tapped into the body, right? Same place your test cocks plug up, right? Right where they're tapped into the body. You know why they do that? Well, that's where they plug up. Because that tap, you got the body of your assembly, and that hole is just tapped in the side of that body like that. Okay, well that water is flowing past the edge of that hole right there, and right where it flows past that opening, it creates a little bit of turbulence. And when you create turbulence, it introduces oxygen or air to the water. Water is a very powerful oxidant. Okay, so as you're introducing that air, it causes oxidation. And when it oxidizes the minerals that are in that water, they drop out, and that's where they accumulate, is right where that opening is at right there. Okay, so that's why that's where your sensing tube and your test cocks plug up, is right where they're tapped into the body, because that's where you have the turbulence and the oxidation process taking place. So make sure that this side of your sensing tube is open as well. And what you can do, I should have done it, but while you've got this check valve out, you can actually see the inside of this one, so you can actually reach in there with a little pick and make sure that it's open and clear. Okay, so and we did, so it's clear, we're good. Now I'll reinstall my sensing tube onto the body of the unit. It's a rubber seal, so it doesn't have to be excessively tight. Okay, now I'm ready to go ahead and close this thing up. So all I need to do is slide my collar back in the opposite direction. Until I get the hole lined up where the test cock goes right there. And now I can replace my number 3 test cock. Again, tightening it only hand tight, so I don't want to over tighten it. Pressurize the unit, test it, move on to my next assembly. So it doesn't take long. These things are not hard to work on. Okay. So this unit, you can get this unit in about any valving configuration that you want to. You can get it in the Vic by thread like this one is. You can get it in Vic by Vic by flange. You can get butterfly valves for it. You can get detector alarm valves for it. So you can get it in about any valving configuration that you want to. This does make it pretty versatile for all types of applications. So now the 6, 8, and 10 inch models are a little bit more complicated in that instead of just having the number 3 test cock on the collar, you actually have a metallic coupling on either side of the collar that you have to remove in order to get access to the check valves. Other than that, the rest of the repair procedures are pretty much the same. All right, any questions on the 957? Okay, cool.